Senior care system, we'd always had a dream of owning our own, and because Teresa's passion for dementia, and let me back up, we ran the biggest, fanciest places. We ran just gorgeous places in Dallas, and at the time we opened a place that was just huge and gorgeous, Teresa said, if we're ever going to do this really well, we've got to do it in a small setting. And I remember I was so proud I'd finally gotten in a big community. I said, have you lost your ever-loving mind? And she said, the problem is in the big settings, you don't know everybody, and everybody's different. Your mom's different from your mom's different from your mom. And the other thing is nobody was raised in a facility. Everybody was raised in homes. And so when we built Teresa's house, they are houses. They are houses for 12 to 16 seniors, and we have houses designated as assisted living. We have houses designated as Alzheimer's care and advanced care. So we kind of do what's called a mini continuum of care. I touch upon just a little bit of that, and then we're going to jump into dementia. All right. So, Teresa and I are the co-owners. Rachel Nelson is our executive director. Karen Clark right here is our community relations director. That is our concept. We build houses. And it was about 6 months after we'd opened our first one that we were discussing that we didn't have residents hovering at the door trying to get out, and that was the best affirmation of the model, that people are more comfortable in a home setting. Those are actual pictures. None of those are models. Those are our actual folks, and as you see, it is a home, and it's a beautiful home. This is off my phone. Here is Canyon Falls. I don't know why the Western Pump Station pops up there, but there's Canyon Falls. That's us. There's Liberty Christian, so we are right around the corner from you guys. I'm a longtime area resident. I live 8 minutes from here in Flower Mound. Teresa is in North Richland Hills. There we have assisted living, memory care, advanced care. We have an activity center here where we'll do special activities. We have a horseback. Horses, equine therapy is a wonderful thing with seniors, especially those with dementia. We joke we have 3 ponies. We have Bucky, we have Oreo, and a 1965 Mustang. The reason we did the Mustang was for our men. They didn't always like the crafts and the other things, and so we had an area they could enjoy. And we liked the 65 because both men and women enjoyed that. Typically, and I know several of you have loved ones with various types of dementia, but especially Alzheimer's, they remember the past much more than they do the present. And so creating an environment that replicates the past is very comfortable. And we actually opened Friday. We've been open in McKinney for 3 years. We've won Best of McKinney every year, but we opened here Friday. These are our first residents moving in. So, but now let's talk about dementia. Dementia 101, what is it? How do you help those with it? And what do you need to know? And I had a chance to meet several of you. I know several of you have parents that have been diagnosed with a dementia, or you suspect a dementia. And I'm going to guess we have some folks with spouses here as well. After we're done, and you can ask anything, we'll stay around as long as you want. If you want to ask any specific questions, we can both answer them, but Teresa is the best on that. So what is dementia? Well, it is a deterioration of intellectual functioning affecting your memory, your thinking, and your social abilities, severely enough to interfere with your daily life. And by the way, if afterwards you'd like a copy of this presentation, we're happy to email it to you, okay? So, we all have our moments where our memory fails us and other things, but when it's really starting to interfere your daily life, that's when you worry about dementia. There are over 130 forms of dementia. The typical symptoms are memory loss to the point of noticed by others. We all have moments where we question ourselves, and I can't remember this, I can't remember that. And as we age, current memories are a little bit harder for us. That's natural. But when other people start to notice it, that's a warning sign. Poor judgment. You can joke you've had poor judgment your whole life, but when it becomes noticeable. Giving money to strangers. That is a big warning sign that your loved one has dementia. Getting scammed is quite common. And by the way, if your loved one lives somewhere else, people prey on the elderly. When my father was at the end of life and I was helping him with some mail, I was amazed how he was getting bombarded by everybody asking for money with emotional appeals. My wife's father was just recently scammed by somebody that called up talked him into going on a website that mirrored his bank account, talked him into going and getting gift cards and giving them to him, things that he never would have done before. But these people are good, and they're really good. But this is also signs that a person is slipping. And investments in others. We have seen people who were very successful lose all of their money by making bad investment decisions, and they were very good at it throughout their life, and now they get bad at it. And sometimes you as the family member do have to step in. You were just sharing that you had to step in and take the car away. You will have to step in and take the credit card away. You will have to step in and get accounts, because folks can lose everything with dementia. And it's very difficult, especially when it's your parent. I distinctly remember the day my mother quit making sense. And the voice and the face that had been competent my whole life was no longer competent and never would be again. And I will tell you, I had to switch out of son mode, because son mode was tearing my heart out. And I had to switch into caregiver mode. It was the only way that I could balance being there for her, because I kept wanting her to be herself, and that day was never going to happen again. Language, difficulty finding the right words. That is another telltale sign. And here again, we all have our moments with this, but when this starts to become normal, and change in personality, that's a big one. A person can become paranoid, and they can just become dull and flat, just lose their initiative, okay? And Teresa, anytime you want to pipe in with something, jump on in. But when you see a big change, that is often a sign that you're dealing with some form of dementia. So who will get it? Well, the great news is 1 in 3 seniors dies with Alzheimer's. I'm being sarcastic when I say the great news. It is very, very common. I will tell you that my grandmother was 1 of 5. 1 of the 5 died to cancer. The other 4 got Alzheimer's. This is something that is very common, and the longer you live, the more likely you are to get it. More than 6 million Americans currently have Alzheimer's disease. That is expected to more than double by the year 2050. Teresa, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I was just going to say something. I just recently read an article by the World Health Organization, and they said that it was the 7th leading cause of death in seniors.
So, side note, almost all of you are here because you have a family member with dementia, okay? If you have dementia, and some are hereditary, some are not, I have a fair amount in my family. I have had long-term care insurance since I was 45. It is affordable at our age. It will become unaffordable in the years to come. The costs for senior care are going to do this. And the difference, unless you're wealthy, you need to have good long-term care insurance. It's called the hard to understand, difficult, expensive policy we all truly need to have. We don't sell it, but if you want to know the agent that I got mine from, who I trust, I'm happy to connect you with it, okay? And to kind of put in perspective, good quality dementia care these days is every bit of $11,000 a month on average, okay? When I first came to Dallas in 1992, a private room for dementia care was $3,000 a month. So it's gone from $3,000 to $11,000 from 92 to now. And that was before the baby boomers overwhelmed the system. As the baby boomers hit us, we're going to have a lot more people needing care, and we're going to lose a lot of nurses and aides in that workforce. And so we're going to have less people to take care of more people. To put it further in perspective, an LVN in 1992 cost me $7.50 an hour. That person is now, what are we paying for LVNs? $29 an hour? Okay, so you can see why the costs have gone up, and they're going to go up a good bit more. So again, get long-term care insurance, but get a good plan from a good company, and you need an agent you trust on that. The number of people living with Alzheimer's disease doubles every 5 years after the age of 65. So the longer you live, the higher your likelihood. You can look at your family history to determine, what your likelihood of that is. But every 5 years, the number doubles. So what are the typical symptoms? Getting lost while driving, or driving getting worse. We have residents with us that went out to the convenience store and ended up in Louisiana. We have folks that ended up out in the country. If your loved one starts getting lost, that was actually the first sign from my mother, was she started rounding the corners of her car. Started hitting things. She'd never been a good driver, but she got worse. Difficulty reasoning. That's another warning sign that you're dealing with dementia. Problem solving and planning and organizing. Now, if a person was always horrible at it, don't get worried. But if you start to see a change, those are some of the key cognitive functions that say something may be going on here. Okay? So, struggling to learn new things, that is a problem, and different dementias are affected differently, but especially with Alzheimer's. The short-term memory is gone, and it's not coming back. If it is one of the vascular dementias, it depends on which part of the brain was damaged. Different dementias show up in many ways, but struggling to learn new things is key. Confusion, disorientation. And so if you have a loved one that's starting to show these things, what is the first thing you do? You go to the doctor. Go to the doctor right away, get a complete physical to rule out reversible problems. There are many things that will show like dementia that are reversible, but you got to get into the doctor quick. Okay, we're going to talk about that. But go to the right doctor. And if you want, send us your information. If you already have a physician, great. If not, we'll give you the physicians that we trust in the area. Okay. And I can tell you, we've heard countless stories of people that went to doctors that didn't handle it well. And one of the things you learn, there's many, many wonderful doctors, but doctors generally feel pretty confident in themselves and may or may not be expertise in dementia. So you need somebody that really, that's their expertise. So there's two types of conditions that present as dementia: reversible and irreversible. So let's talk about the reversible ones if they're successfully treated. The first is depression. Depression can lead to dementia, and it does have to be treated, and if it's not treated, it can lead to real problems. But if it is treated, you can get a person back. Tumors. That was what my mother had. She had a brain tumor, and she started to have problems. She didn't want to tell anybody because she was scared to death. She said, oh my gosh, I'm losing it. If you or anybody you love is showing the first signs, get in quick, because you want to get that tumor out while it's small, before it's done too much damage. What the tumor is doing is it's growing in the brain, it is pressing on the brain, and it is damaging the brain. And the longer it goes untreated, the more damage it will do. There are reversible tumors, and there are not. There are cancerous and non-cancerous, but the quicker the better. And hydrocephalus, water on the brain. Anything that's putting pressure on the brain impacts the brain's ability to work. There's only so much room up in here. And when something else is in there, like water, it's going to affect it. This is reversible. Subdural hematoma, brain bleed. Oftentimes after a person has fallen, if they've hit their head, they will get a brain bleed in there. And it may not be obvious for a couple of days. It is very important if they have a brain bleed to get to the doctor right away, because that damage can become significant in time. You remember Sonny and Cher. Sonny hit his head skiing and he had a brain bleed and he died. I had a friend of mine who went skiing, was wearing his helmet, but he hit his head, didn't think anything of it. 3 days later, he's in the hospital. So it is quite common, especially if a person is on blood thinners. If you know of a person who has fallen and they're on blood thinners and they hit their head, get them to the doctor right away. Alcohol and drugs. Alcohol, some of the youngest dementia patients we see are those from alcohol. And by the way, we are the group that was raised on the glass of wine is healthy. Alcohol is not healthy in any dose. I enjoy alcohol. I'm not a teetotaler, but I am very careful and selective now about when I drink. And I heard somebody say the other day, unless it tastes really good, spit it out. Because it does do damage. If you have it in small quantities, you're probably fine, but just recognize it impacts things. And if you are more prone to having dementia, it may or may not be something you want to do. Sleep deprivation. You can actually show signs of dementia from not getting enough sleep. And sleeping is something we Americans do really poorly. There are groups that can help you with sleep, but those are all things that are reversible if successfully treated. In addition, hypothyroidism, low levels of thyroid hormones. You can show like you have dementia. That is very reversible. Dietary disorders, just being deficient in vitamin B12 can lead to dementia-type conditions. Your diet really makes a big difference. And then infection, and this is one of the things we see most often. If a person has a urinary tract infection, they will be out of their mind very quickly, and you need to get it addressed quickly. And if you have a loved one who is incontinent, you need to make sure, especially if they're a female, they're getting cleaned well, because if they're not, they'll get UTIs regularly and become chronic and real problems. Teresa, anything you're going to say on that?
I want to say something. When you go to the doctor, again, we can give you some doctors that we think would be better to help you kind of get diagnosed properly. But one of the first and most important things is to ask them to do lab work, because a lot of these things, again, I've had residents that had severely low vitamin D levels, vitamin B12 levels, and you get them on these medications, and 3 months later, they're a totally different person. So dietary type things where they don't take enough in anymore, or their body's not metabolizing it correctly, can cause them to look like they have dementia. And I wanted just to kind of say that dementia is a symptom. It's not really a diagnosis. It's just a term used to describe a bunch of symptoms. But what the most common types of dementia means the brain is dying. And so it's very difficult to see somebody start to decline. And you have to understand that they're not going to be able to do the things that they used to be able to do because the brain is dying. And the longer it goes on, the more the brain is dying to where they get to be bedridden and have to be taken care of. So.
And they often talk about dementia as the long goodbye, because true dementia is irreversible and the brain is dying. We're going to talk more about that, and it takes a long time. But as Teresa said, there are some reversible. We've had people move into us because they were having so much confusion. Teresa looked at things, figured out what it was, and they've moved back out again because they did well. We don't have many alumni, but we do have a few alumni, and part of it is just getting the right treatment. Oftentimes just eating well. Many a senior home alone just eats really, really poorly. So now let's talk about the irreversible. And although I said there's 130, we're going to focus on the top 4. Alzheimer's disease, Lewy Body dementia, Frontal Temporal Lobe dementia, and Vascular Dementia. Those are the 4 biggies. So let's talk about Alzheimer's. It is the most common type, it is progressive, and it is fatal. And whenever people find out I'm in senior care and dementia care, they're always, hey, did you hear about this new breakthrough? Did you hear about that new breakthrough? Over my 35 years, about every 2 years, there's a great big breakthrough, okay? And nothing really changes, okay? We've been able to slow it a little bit. We've been able to understand maybe a little bit more what causes it, but they've basically said if you cut through all the BS, conditioning, being strong, having good cardio, eating well, and keeping strength up, that's the only things that have really shown any difference. And it's not going to stop it. So just recognize it is a part of it. We just have to learn how to effectively treat it and take care of things. Memories fade in reverse order. A way Alzheimer's disease was explained to me once that was helpful was if you had a computer that could no longer save new files. Okay? The old files are great, but it can't save anything new. It can't make new memories. And then you started deleting files from the most recent going backwards. So the old files are fine, but you start deleting backwards. When my own grandmother had Alzheimer's, she went back in time. She first forgot who we grandchildren were when she went back to before we existed. Then she forgot who my mother was, because that was her daughter-in-law. Then she started to do generational confusion. She started to ask my father, why wasn't he home from school? He was an adult with kids. She started to mix up her daughter up as her sister, because as she went back in time, she looked more her age, sister-wise, and then she confused her as her mother. And people will actually go back into their 60s, 50s, 40s, 30s, and 20s. And guess what happens when they go back into their 20s and teens? Sometimes they'll start dating again. You guys may remember Sandra Day O'Connor, the Supreme Court Justice. You may have heard that her husband at the Alzheimer's community had a girlfriend. And Justice O'Connor recognized he did not remember her anymore, and being with this woman made him happy, and she accepted it. That is brutally hard. There's just no 2 ways about it. But recognize they can't help it. They have gone back, they have no memory of that. And so going back in time. Also with Alzheimer's, folks get lost, especially to time and place. My aunt who had Alzheimer's, she was talking about things from the 1970s and talking about neighbors that had moved away 30 years ago, like they were still there. They're living in that past time. It is related to beta amyloid, and when you hear about plaques and tangles, that's heavily Alzheimer's disease. Anything you want to say on Alzheimer's before we move on to Lewy Body?
No, out of those 130, it's about 60 to 70%. So it's the largest type of dementia that you will.
And it becomes an umbrella term. People will just call things Alzheimer's even when they fall into other categories because it is the most common. Right? So Lewy Body. Anybody here have a family member with Lewy Body? Okay. This is one of them. They're all bad. This is one of the worst. It is the second most common type. unusual cells found in the brain that are killing nerve cells. What makes it so horrible are falls, delusions, and insomnia, and nightmares that seem real. Our residents with Lewy Body will see things coming out of the curtain, see things coming out of the ceiling, horrific things that are very real to them. I'm sorry for anybody that is going through this one. It is a very difficult one. And the treatment is very, very difficult. With Alzheimer's, we kind of know what's ahead. This is one that's a little more challenging. Anything you want to say on Lewy Body?
On the Lewy Body, they more delusions is them thinking things are true and they're not true. And I've seen 2 or 3 different couples that the wives have accused their husbands of having an affair. And they'll say, I saw you on the couch with that woman. Don't you tell me you weren't in there. And it's true in their mind. And they have a lot of falls. So people think that maybe they have Parkinson's disease. And so if you kind of start seeing falls and a lot of delusional thinking, then it's probably Lewy Body, and it doesn't always respond well to medications that are given for Alzheimer's disease. So it's very important to try to figure out what type it is, but it's hard to figure out. And it's really based on symptoms as to what are they displaying, what are you seeing, as to how to figure out which type it is.
And you often find a person with Lewy Body can be really sharp in some areas. We have a resident who I was bringing a friend around, we said hi, and she was chatting away, and he was thinking, why is she here? She's great. And they had slammed the door open and knocked a hole in the wall, and she said, by the way, they need to repair that hole because there's a person living in it. And she said, I looked in and I saw him, he was looking back at me. And everything she said prior to that, 100% accurate. Current modern events, she was talking about who was present, she was talking about everything, 100%, and yet she would swear somebody was living in the wall. So just recognize that just because they're fine in some areas doesn't mean they don't have dementia.
They don't normally present with memory loss at first. And so that's another kind of clue to think, oh, they're doing some of these other things, and it's not about short-term memory loss, but it's more about delusions and falling and those kind of things. You think in Lewy Body.
Another reason to find a doctor that specializes in dementia, okay? Because general practitioners touched upon it a little bit, you need somebody that specializes. So now frontal temporal lobe dementia. Damage to the frontal lobe and temporal lobe. Impulsive and behavior problems. And Teresa, you've talked about safety issues, being unaware of that. They say unexpected, rude, oftentimes mean things. And you have to understand it's not their fault. Their brain is dying, their brain is damaged. Apathy, not caring, they'll just go very blank. I know you have a lot of insights here.
Or they don't care about other people either, or how another person is thinking or feeling. They just want what they want when they want it. And we've had very religious people come to stay with us, and all of a sudden they're saying a lot of sexual things out loud and grabbing staff, and their wife is just mortified. And I was like, it's the dementia. It's not them, it's the dementia. It causes them to do things that maybe they were thinking in their brain in the past, but they kept it in their brain. They didn't say it out loud or act on it. And now they don't have any of that impulse control, so it's coming out.
We all have that little filter in us. That filter goes away. But recognize too that you have sometimes a person will act on urges there. You'll also have some people that just change completely, and the brain balance can change things. I've had people that were incredible become mean as snakes. We had a resident once who everybody loved. He was everybody's favorite. And his wife once said to me, before he got dementia, he was a mean SOB. And she said, none of us liked him. We actually like this guy much better. So who a person comes through dementia isn't always related to who they were before. Because of brain damage and chemical imbalances, people can change. So don't be horrified. It's understandable to be horrified, but don't think less of a loved one because they start to say really bad things. Their brain has been damaged and changed. Vascular dementia. This one is caused by loss of blood flow to parts of the brain. Okay? That is often caused by stroke. Something has damaged the brain. And part of the reason when you have a stroke or a worry about a stroke, you need to get to the hospital right away, is that there are certain types of strokes that are reversible, but they have to give medications to break up that clot. There is something that is keeping blood from getting to a certain part of the brain, and if the brain does not get blood quickly, it will start to die. And that you will actually see scans of these people's brains with black spots on them, where the brain has been damaged. If it's a little bit, sometimes the brain can work around it, but too much, it is significant. Diabetes, high blood pressure, and cholesterol all can cause this. Okay? I struggle with high blood pressure. I take 3 blood pressure pills a day, even though I exercise religiously. So be aware if you suffer from any of those, you need to get them treated and treated effectively because it can lead to vascular dementia. People with vascular dementia can have really good days where you swear they're fine, and they can have really bad days. And by the way, if this is your parent, invariably when your siblings come in, they'll have a good day, and when the siblings are gone, they'll have their bad days. That's just the way it works. But But part of the brain is still functioning well, parts are not. And how it shows up, they can have certain areas they remember perfectly because that part of the brain wasn't damaged. And other parts of the brain were damaged, it's gone. And that ability to reason is not. So it is one of the harder to predict forms of dementia because everybody with vascular dementia is different based on what part of their brain died. As I said, it is the least predictable. So what is happening with all dementias? Well, it is progressive brain damage. The brain is damaged and it is continuing to get damaged. As Teresa said, the brain is dying. And that's hard to hear, especially when it's your loved one, but it is the unfortunate reality, it is dying. And as it dies, it atrophies, which means it shrinks. Now, this person, their left calf has atrophied, their right is not. You can visually see that. You can't look at me and see what's going on in my brain. And that's the hardest thing. I remember, my mother looked herself. She was the mother I'd always known. Her face hadn't changed, but her brain was dying on the inside. And your loved ones, they still look themselves, they still talk themselves, but their brain is dying. That is healthy, that is not, and that is what is going on. This is a healthy brain, this is severe Alzheimer's. Look how much of the brain is gone. That's what is happening. And so when you get frustrated, very understandably so, with them making mistakes and saying things that don't make sense or doing embarrassing things, that function is no longer there and it's not coming back, unfortunately. So your whole goal when you have a loved one with dementia and answer prayers by helping seniors go through dementia is to help them get through a very undignified disease with as much of their dignity intact as possible. We're people of faith, and it says in Isaiah 46:4, even to your old age and gray hairs, I am he who will sustain you and I will carry you, I will sustain you and I will rescue you. God answers those prayers through us. When we are taking care or making sure the care is taken care of, that's how we answer these prayers. So how do you help somebody with dementia? Well, you understand what's going on. As I said, the computer and the analogy of wiping the files out and going back, they also talk about reverse development. Do you want to talk about that a little bit, Teresa?
Well, there is different people stage dementias. Like the Alzheimer's Association will say there's 3 stages of dementia. The global deterioration says there's 7 stages. We use a lady that's called Tifa Snow. Have you ever seen Tifa Snow? Anybody? Go online and watch her YouTubes. They're very informational. She just gives you little snippets, but it's very good information on how to, maybe if you're having problems with some situation, how to help. But she has 6 stages, and the Allen Cognitive Scale has 6 stages. So different people categorize it. It's say this is dementia from the beginning to the end. There's nothing, it doesn't matter whose system you use, they just break them up into different sections. So we use a 6 scale versus a 3 scale. But the reversible part of it, the global deterioration says that as you age, your brain learns and you grow and you learn different things until you're about at age 12. That's kind of where they use the scale. When you get to be about 12, you are able to what we call hold a job. So you're able to come home, take the dishes out, take the dog out, do your homework, do some different tasks. If you turn it around, and let's say that the same stage is where you first start getting dementia, people still hold a job a lot of times, and they're driving, and sometimes work is the very first place it notices something's going on. For example, they're an accountant, and now they can't even add and subtract correctly. And so they're like, what is happening? And because it's a work situation, they can't always call a spouse and say, hey, something's going on with your partner here. But then they start to decline even more. So the way a baby starts to sit up at around 6 months of age, and maybe around a year, they're starting to say a word, or maybe walking, and then when they get a little bit older, they're toileting themselves, and their bowel and bladder getting trained. As the dementia, it's called reverse staging, and so as the dementia starts to eat more and more of their brain, or whatever disease they're having with their brain, they start to decline in that order. So first, they're high functioning, they can stay at home, do things, and then they start to have problems where you're noticing they're not taking their medications, they're not taking care of their yard, they start getting little dings on the back of their cars because their peripheral vision is getting smaller and smaller, and they don't see. So they'll have car wrecks, or they back into people, and they don't know they're backing into people and doing things like that. And then it starts to get to where they're not changing their clothes, or they don't know how to cook, or they're burning things on the stove. And then it goes down more, where now they're becoming incontinent, bowel and bladder, all the way down to where they're only saying 1 or 2 words, and then bedbound. Did I describe it? Did it make sense? So it's in the reverse order?
And so, I mean, you shared that you took the keys away from your mom. That was the last thing she gained, was the ability to drive. That's the first thing she loses. Now you back up, and what were the previous things she gained? She's gonna go in reverse order with the typical dementia. Okay? Now, different dementias show up differently, but that's basically it. What is the first thing a child learns to do is to hold their head up and smile. It's the last thing the dementia patient loses. So just recognize, look at how we develop, that's what you're gonna see as they decline. So a key is to put them in positions to succeed. Dementia stinks. And you can appreciate if I kept telling you you were wrong and you were messing up, how you'd feel. So when we talk about putting a person into position to succeed, how many of you have ever heard of Darryl Royal, the former coach of the University of Texas? The stadium's named after him. I had a chance to meet Coach Royal when he was in the early to mid stages of dementia. And we were there with a group of guys, and everybody was, oh my gosh, it's Coach Royal, this is great. And everybody said, hey, what do you think about this year's UT team? Do you think we're going to win the national championship? Suppose he had any idea about this year's UT team? Nope. Suppose he knew he should know? And did he feel horrible about the fact he did? So a very innocent question put him in a very awkward spot. And he was like, oh, I'm sure they'll be fine. You could just see he was visibly uncomfortable. And then somebody else said, hey, coach, what do you think about this year's Dallas Cowboys team? You think Emmett's going to get us to the Super Bowl? He had no idea who Emmett was. Because his dementia, he was back living in the past. And again, he knew he should know. And you can appreciate the feeling. If there's something you know you should know and you don't know, you feel horrible. And he felt awkward, his wife felt awkward. I recognized what was going on, and I said, hey, coach, tell me about the favorite game you ever coached. And he goes, 1969 Arkansas, Texas. He gave us a play-by-play of it. And once again, he was Coach Royal. And he commanded the room. And his wife was beaming, and he was beaming, and it was a special moment because I put him in a position to succeed. Now, you can appreciate if you don't remember what you had for breakfast, and I say, so what did you have for breakfast this morning? Boy, does that feel awkward. You don't know. And if you're struggling to remember who I am, do you remember my name? Can you tell me my name? As a kid, I want you to tell me you know me. But you're putting them in a position where they struggle. And imagine how horrible you'd feel if you didn't know the answer to something that you should know. So it's very natural to do these, and so I've got to ask you to step away from what's natural. Because it's very natural to want your mom to remember you by name, to be able to tell you what they had for breakfast. So when I'm dealing with dementia patients, I never ask them about current events. I say, you know what, where were you born? Tell me what life was like there. What were the neat things about it? Because folks can remember their childhood, and they can remember those things. So try to put them in a position to succeed. Talk about the past, not the present, because the past will be much more. Now, that is typically Alzheimer's. There are certain forms of dementia where they do remember the present, but kind of feel them out. And if you see they're struggling with something, avoid it, okay? And let me step on that. Recognize, when you have a loved one with dementia, your goal is to make every day a success. It's not going to work always like that, but you try. President Reagan's daughter shared, we make every day a party. The next day he has no memory of the previous day party. But if he had fun, we call that a success. One of the things they do with President Reagan, it doesn't sound very presidential, but they'd have him clean the leaves out of the pool. He'd clean the leaves out of the pool and keep him busy for 20 minutes, and he felt good. And then when he wasn't looking, they'd throw the leaves back in the pool. And they'd have him clean them again. But it gave him something that he can do. Now the man had been president. but he was no longer capable of presidential things. We coach our staff, and matter of fact, I was just training them on this today. Have the residents who want help you set the table. It'll take twice as long. Have them help you fold the clothes. It'll take 3 times as long, but they'll feel good. They're actually getting to do something they can do. And sometimes the mundane tasks that were a pain when you were younger are now a positive because you can still do them. Now this is a big one. Talk more slowly in a calm voice using familiar words. Make it easy to comprehend, okay? And I'm going to use an analogy that some of you will appreciate, some of you will not. If you've ever been really hungover, you know you need folks to be a little bit slower and a little bit calmer and a little bit quieter. Well, guess what? That's because your brain's not functioning as well. Now you get a sense for what it's like with dementia. And you can appreciate if I talk really, really fast, you better be really, really sharp to be able to catch up. Or if I talk slowly and I use more basic words, it's easier for you to follow, okay? You know, you will see that some of the most talented orators talk at a 2nd or 3rd grade level because it's easy to digest. Those words are easy. You have to slow things down with a loved one because their brain is moving more slowly, okay? And also recognize they will start to lose words. And Teresa, you want to talk a little bit about words, how often you skip every 2nd, 3rd word, some of those things?
Oh, and I don't know if you've added it in the slides about hearing or not, but their hearing starts to go. So even if you got them a $5,000 hearing aid, they're going to wrap it up in a tissue and put it somewhere because it starts to bother them. And families get real upset because I just paid all this money for this hearing aid. They don't want it. It's irritating them. All they hear is all this crazy stuff, noise going in their ear, or they're still not hearing anything, so it's not effective for them. But they may say, like, I may say, you look nice today, and all they hear is nice today, and they're like, oh, what do you mean nice today? And so they start to lose some of the words that you're saying. As the disease progresses, they lose more and more words. So we just say like cookie, milk, come with me. It's more about just using one word, but it's more about your nonverbal, and I don't know if you're going to get into this. They don't understand the words, but they're looking at you, and they're listening to your tone of voice and how you're talking to them. And if they feel like it's condescending, they may smart back off with a bunch of cuss words at you, and like, who the hell do you think you are? I'm your mother, you're not. Who do you think you are? And do stuff like that. And so you kind of have to go with the flow. Don't ever get into a confrontation. You are never going to win. So.
The other is keep it short and simple. If you talk to an occupational therapist and they work with people with brain injuries, they have found the same things that work with brain injuries work with people with dementia because this is progressive brain damage. And so things that are very routine to us are actually fairly complicated. If I say to you, hey, put your shoes and socks on, we gotta go, shoes and socks is a lot of steps. If a person's struggling, you say, hey, grab that sock, okay, let's slide it over the toe, now let's pull it to the heel, now let's pull it up. Sometimes you have to break things down into those simple of steps for the person to do. Why do people often wear the same clothes again and again when they have dementia? Because it gets too complicated to choose clothing and it gets too complicated to put clothing on. I'll never forget making rounds one day, and I had a lady who was a school teacher, always dressed impeccably. She was dressed to a T, and she had her underwear on over her shoulder and her neck. She knew she put it on, but she put it on the wrong place. She was visibly uncomfortable because she knew something was wrong, but she didn't know what, okay? And let me just say too, we say in healthcare, you either laugh or you cry, okay? You don't ever laugh at a resident, but you can laugh with them, and you have to have a sense of humor to break it up, okay? But just recognize, break things into simple steps. Hey, why don't you step up? Let's walk on over here, let's have a seat over here. Simple steps, make it simple, and talk slowly. Okay, and then give options. Rather than say, what do you want to do? Do you want to go to Mexican or do you want to go to a burger place? Because they may not be able to pull something out when not given options. Keep it simple. Do you want to watch this movie or this movie? Do you want to watch this TV show or that TV show? Suggest and give 2 to 3 options. We actually have specialized wardrobes at our community where we can give them the bulk of the clothing's hidden because you open it up, all those clothes are overwhelming. we will show 4 to 5 outfits, so they have a choice, but it's not an overwhelming choice. And then when they get farther along, we drop it to 1 or 2. And then we even hang the outfits on the outside where shirt and bra is up here, pants and blouse are down here, so it guides you in. But think through those things and break it down and make it simple. Now it's easier just to dress a person, but you can appreciate what happens to your dignity if I come in and dress her. Okay? Poof, out the way. Especially for everybody, especially for ladies. So anything you can do to cue them through the process is even better. So as I said, break tasks, movements down to 1 step at a time. Use empathy. You know, the hardest part for a person with dementia is when they have a foot in reality and a foot in dementia. And when they recognize they're losing it, it is terrifying. And you can appreciate if we face this, and odds are 1/3 of us in this room are gonna face this, the thought of losing your memory or whatnot is horrifying. And so using empathy, don't say, oh, it'll be fine. You say, I am so sorry. I'm so sorry you're going through this, but I'm gonna be there with you. I'm gonna stay by your side. I'm gonna make sure that you're taken care of. And if a person's struggling, say, I know that really stinks. I can tell you when my own father had to start using a scooter. I said, Dad, I know that stinks. Stunk when he had to give up his car. Stunk when he had to start using a scooter. Old age is not for sissies. And Dad used to say, whoever called him the golden years, he wanted to smack. So just use empathy. I am sorry, but I'm gonna be there for you. And we had a family member once that you turned into a positive. Yes, you have Alzheimer's. Thank goodness we know. At least now we have an explanation for it and we know how to support you. And yes, I know it's struggling, but you know what? We know what's going on. We're gonna be there for you. Try and turn it into positive. This is so hard. I am so sorry. This is a big one. You wanna talk about this one a little bit?
So,
Yeah, and what I wrote here is give up being right, go with the flow.
so there are parts of their brain that are able to reason to say 1 + 1 is 2, or this is black, this is white. It's not always there anymore. And so if you're saying something with them and you can tell that they have a difference of opinion about something, you're gonna have to give up being right. So you just kind of have to go with the flow. And if they say, well, no, I'm gonna do it this way, say, okay, Mom, can I help with anything? So doing the steps is really important. So let's say that they love to cook, but my grandmother was a great cook. And I went to her house one day and she had made chicken and dumplings, and she had made a homemade blackberry cobbler, which I loved. And I took a bite out of it and I was like, oh my gosh, what happened? And she had dumped a whole thing of salt instead of sugar into that. And it was the saltiest thing I've ever had in my entire life. And so I had to sit there and I had to keep eating some bites, and I was thinking, oh Lord, let me just get done with this cobbler. But if you give them steps, so put it out for them. You measure it and put it out. They can still add it in, they can still stir, they can still put it in, different muffin pans or whatever, baking a cake or whatever they're doing. But just break it down for them. But give up being right. So if Godwin, can you push on me? Mm-hmm. So if you are thinking that you want them to do something, and you say, Mom, you have to do this, and you keep pushing on them, what is she gonna do? Push back. And it's not always gonna be a nice pushback. And then you're gonna have to say, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to do that. I didn't realize that I was, whatever it is. And so that's really important to always say you're sorry. Even though you know you didn't do anything wrong, you still need to say you're sorry to kind of get over that hump, because otherwise they're still gonna be upset with you. And never say, don't you remember? So always say, I'm sorry, and never say, don't you remember?
One of the things, and we actually have a whole section on it, if you're interested, I'd send you videos on validation therapy. And you will have a loved one with dementia do some bizarre things. There's always a reason why they're doing it. It may not be obvious why they are, but if you can validate the emotions, you can't say, hey, yes, that's right, and you shouldn't say, no, that's wrong. You can say, wow, I understand. So as an example, if you go to a restaurant and you're not happy with the food, and you say to the waiter, this isn't good, and the waiter's like, whatever, you get more mad. If the waiter says, oh my goodness, I'm sorry you're not upset, I'm gonna jump right on that, you calm down. Because they validated you're upset, they're upset too. So if your loved one is upset, get upset with them, right? We had a resident who would every afternoon accuse us of stealing. I don't know if you've seen this with a family member, but she would come out every day and she would say, "Dadgummit, I'm losing everything. You guys are a bunch of thieves. You're stealing everything from me." And we would say, "Oh my gosh, what's going on?" And so she'd identify something was stolen. We'd go look at it. We'd find it. She would tell us it wasn't hers. We'd say, "But you got your name on it." "Well, you put my name on it." And we'd go round and round. And then we learned validation therapy. And then the next time she came out, she said, "Oh, I'm losing everything." And we mirrored. And we said, "Oh, you're losing everything." Not in a mimicking, not in a mocking way, but in a repeating back. "Did I understand you correct? You're losing everything. Oh my goodness, what's going on?" And each time she said, "I'm losing everything," we said, "You're losing everything. Everything's being taken from you. Everything's being taken." Each time she said it, she calmed down, we calmed down, and then she finally said, "I'm losing all my friends." She, at 85, had lost a lot of friends, and she was mourning the loss of friends, but through her dementia, she couldn't say, "Hey, I'm having a bad day. Would you sit with me?" Instead, it came out as a sweater. And oftentimes, things will be a symbol. Sweaters, wedding rings, all sorts of things can be a symbol. So recognize there may be something bizarre. We never would have gotten it, but just by mirroring back and empathizing and saying, "I understand, tell me more about that," you can oftentimes calm a person with that. Focus on today and on tasks they can do to help. Teresa mentioned breaking cooking down. If your mom was a great cook and you're cooking, let her stir the bowl, okay? And if she messes it up, so be it. Just create another bowl, okay? Let her do the laundry. Yes, it'll take twice as long. We've had people that would keep children's clothes on hand and throw them in the dryer and let the mom fold them because, hey, the children's clothes brought back good memories and they could fold. They folded everything in the house. Great. Have her fold it again. It makes her feel comfortable and gives her some success. So some don'ts and do's. Don't argue, because the more you fight, the more they have to fight. And you're not going to win because they're not going to remember, but you are going to frustrate them and make it a bad day. Do encourage. Don't tell them they're wrong because they don't realize they're wrong and they can't get it through. The brain is dying, it's no longer there. Do validate. Validate the emotion. "Oh wow, I can see why you'd be upset about that." If they're talking about a parent that's no longer here, you can talk about, "Tell me about mom. Tell me about your grandmother. She was pretty special, wasn't she?" "Oh my gosh, she was the best." We have a resident at our McKinney site. When I come through, "Hey, are you going to Dallas? You got room in your car? You need to take me to Dallas." "Well, what's going on in Dallas? That's where I live. I got to get home." "Can't get home. Tell me about your home." "Oh, my sisters, my parents, we live there. It's great." "Oh, neat. Well, tell me more about that." And she'll reminisce and go on. And after a little bit, I'll say, "Well, when did you live there?" "I lived there from when I was 7 to 28. So she recognized she's not there anymore. But a few minutes ago, she was reminiscing and she wanted to reminisce. And in the past, when we'd say, "You don't live in Dallas, you live in an assisted living," that didn't help. But by reminiscing and validating, we got through it. Don't talk down to them or treat them like a child. Even though they may have very childlike behavior, they are still your parent and they are still an adult or whatever the relationship is. It can be challenging, but recognize that. Do match their tone and their volume. Don't tell them they've already told you the story. So you can appreciate if, so I asked you about your mom and you told me, if I would have said, "You've told me that 4 times already," how horrible would you have felt? Especially if you couldn't remember it. So remember, yes, my grandmother would tell my grandfather's World War I story again and again and again because it had deeply marked her. And speaking of which, old things that happened in the past that are deeply marked will come out again and again. We had a resident who every afternoon at 3 o'clock would be worried about her kids, that they were home alone and something had happened to them. Because guess what? At some point when they were young, something had happened to them. Another thing that is deeply imprinted are bad words. The bad words that as a kid you were told, "Do not say that," that is deeply imprinted. So when they start to use other words, guess what word's still there? The bad words. And so sometimes a person will start to pull those bad words out because they're still vivid, part of the dementia. Be willing to listen to the same story over and over and over. It is called the long goodbye and it's called the 36-hour day because it is brutal. So what can you do to prevent dementia? Well, cognitive training. Use it or lose it. You should continue to challenge your brain. Take different ways to work or different ways around. Do word puzzles, do things that challenge you. Blood pressure control. This is a big one. If you're running too much blood pressure, you will damage your brain. So do not let your blood pressure go untreated. Exercise, both cardio and weight training. This is one of the few things that has actually been shown to move the needle. Eating well, avoiding processed food. The number of seniors is doing this, the percentage of dementia is doing this. It is outpacing the growth in seniors 3 times. we're doing something. Something has changed in our environment, and the greatest expectation besides pollution is just food. Something we're eating. Processed foods are not good for us, and there's a lot of crap in our food. So organic is what your grandparents called food, just how it came out of the ground. My long-term care insurance, just in case, as I said, the costs have shot up and they are going to go much higher. And you want the best when it comes to senior care. There's a big difference between average, good, and average and great. Yes.
What can you expect to pay for long-term care insurance?
So I got it when I was 45, and my rate stays the same because I got it younger. I pay $1,500 a year. Okay, I can get you with an agent that can tell you. I would bet you're probably in the $2,000, $2,500 range as you go 100 up a year. But when you consider that a month of coverage right now is about $11,000 in a good community, and by the time you need it, it'll be a good bit more. It is money well spent. And you have to look at your family history, but most of you are here because you have somebody with dementia, okay? You know, if your family dies young of cancer, maybe it's not as big of a deal. But if you have dementia, if you have strokes in your family, anything that causes long-term disability, you need long-term care insurance. And by the way, long-term care insurance doesn't just cover care in a center, it also covers care in your house. It covers a lot of different things. Okay? As I said, so you're protected. So that is the official part of the program, but we'd be happy to open it up, and you can cancel there.